All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming to the Herrington Harbour this morning for our winter seminar series. Today, we're fortunate to welcome back retired Navy Captain Tate Westbrook. Thank you. Captain Westbrook is a highly respected mariner and founder of the Harbour Academy, who brings decades of hands-on experience in seamanship, navigation, and real-world vessel handling. His practical approach to safe, confident cruising, passage planning, and crew management has made him a favorite among boaters at Herrington Harbour, and we are very grateful to have him today. So you guys please welcome Captain Tate Westbrook.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Brad. I want to thank everybody for showing up. For those online, I think we've got almost 30 online right now who've joined us. So thanks to the audience, both here and online. Looks like we're almost a full house. Got about 80 people here. Thank you for showing up today, and thank you for logging in, and thanks to the Cheneys and the Herrington Harbour team and to Brad Wells for putting this and the entire winter lecture series together. And thanks to Herrington Harbour for this great training facility. Thank you for the kind introduction. My name is Tate Westbrook, and I grew up in Tennessee on inland lakes, so I certainly didn't begin ocean cruising early on. Started with small sail and power boats, did Navy ROTC at Tulane, and then spent a 28-year career in the Navy. So I've got over 100,000 sea miles under my keel, whether it's on ships or personal vessels. I earned my first license in 1994. It was just a 200-ton master's license and third mate Oceans Unlimited, but continued until I had command of my own destroyer, later Commodore of all of our surface ships in Europe and Africa. And my wife and I have owned a mini power and sailboats. I'm primarily a sailor and only switched to the dark side about 6 years ago. And though my kids say, man, Dad, we would have come boating a lot more often had you not had a sailboat as long as you did. And I have a degree in rhetoric and an MBA. And what that means is you do not have to be an engineer to be a great seaman or navigator. Question? I do hear music.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes. Brad will fix that. We've got a soundtrack today, that's right. Well, I like that, and it's the song, I Don't Want to Do No Dirty Work. So thank you for pointing that out. So bottom line is, we will occasionally, and I'll try not to geek out too much, but occasionally may deep dive into some of the technical aspects of navigation this afternoon or some of the seamanship stuff. I love, and I'm not an engineer, I love knowing the why behind what we do in our recreational boating lives, and I think it's important to occasionally dive into the technical stuff, but again, you don't have to be an engineer or a scientist to do this. You see my website there. I host this website and the Facebook group by the same name, and the bottom line is, I told my wife this morning, I'm so fired up to go hang out with boaty people and talk about boaty stuff. This is what I love, and that's why I created the website to help people basically enjoy their boats better and expand their horizons. My focus is on trawlers by name, but again, I've regularly done training seminars, deliveries, etc., on both sail and power. The CAPCA logo is here because I also serve as the Director of Continuing Education for the Chesapeake Area Professional Captains Associations. So if I'm not available for training or delivery, we have an entire network of local area captains that are fully vetted and currently available that you can hire through the CAPCA website. But bottom line is, today I want to help you be brilliant on the basics so you can expand your horizons and be more comfortable getting places. We'll do seamanship this morning, and for those of you who are coming this afternoon, we'll focus on navigation. Here are the topics we'll cover today, and to be clear, that little call-out box, please ask questions during the presentation, and for those of you online, Brad is capturing any of the questions that you may have by chat. I'll repeat the question in the room here for anybody online, but if you've got a question, that means there are probably likely others here who've got the same question. Don't wait till the end, please interrupt me and we'll dive deep. Now, this is not a damage control course. We could do a full day just on that, but I've got just a couple slides to touch on the three biggies: fire, flooding, man overboard today, because prevention and mitigation of those are literally a life and death item. Excuse me, good friend of mine, and if you are in the blogosphere or Facebook group, my good friend Bruce Beard, who runs the Facebook group Trawler Life, recently had a tiny rupture in a fuel injector line, which at the pressure of our modern common rail diesels is typically about 20 to 25,000 PSI, pounds per square inch, running through those tiny steel tubes. That little pinhole on his only 4 or 5-year-old boat, the way he detected the leak, no change in performance of the engine, he detected it by smell only because the mist created by 25,000 pound fuel coming out of a tiny hole and creates a very fine mist. And I asked him, since we've experienced this in the Navy, what did you see when you opened the engine room hatch? And he said it was a cloud of perfectly atomized diesel fuel, which is extremely flammable and extremely explosive. So he figured it out he said he estimates from 5 minutes from smell to shutdown. Now, I talk about the fire extinguisher here. I think the Coast Guard guy comes and does a full-blown safety thing, so I'm not going to dive super deep into that. However, there was a great study done by the Boat US Foundation. That photo on the upper right is from their test, and they grabbed 18 inexperienced but experienced boaters, but inexperienced, no firefighters in the group. They volunteered to come help them do their test. And so that's like grabbing just 18 people here or along the dock, setting a fire out in the parking lot, and then handing them a fire extinguisher and say, go put out that fire. And so as a result of that test, improper technique was the norm. And so, if we did a raise of hands, how many people in this room have ever fought a Class Bravo, which is fuel-based fire, in their lives? 1, 2, 3, 4 in the room. So, and maybe kitchen fires, probably not, or maybe your car, I'm not sure. But so a fraction of the population, and even though I've been through a ton of Navy firefighting schools over the years, in which we are able to discharge dry chemical and CO2 fire bottles, I have never fought a fire. I get a little emotional thinking about this because in my career, we experienced 2 Class Bravo fires in 2 different ships that I served in, and successfully put out, one with minor injuries, but I didn't fight the fire. I was an officer. I trained the people. I was in charge of the teams. Junior sailors, men and women, 18, 19 years old, they fought the fires. And so with all of us, with that show of hands, 4 out of 40, and if we asked, if we charted it, when was the last time you did that? It might have been years since you actually picked up a fireball. So I show that here because knowing how to do it probably takes practice. And then the other is that the U.S. Coast Guard, minimums are just absolutely inadequate. Here's the little table of what the Coast Guard requires for the minimum on board, and the bottom line, partly based on that inexperience, partly based on the stress of the fire. And of course, the key is the fire on your boat is not going to be on deck like it is in this little pan in the parking lot. It's going to be in the engine compartment, and so you're going to have to fight your way in to save your boat. And so the typical 5B fire extinguisher lasts approximately 10 seconds. Even in the parking lot, you're not going to be able to put a fire out with just one of those. And then the idea that depending on where you are, and if you're planning on doing longer range cruising and you're offshore or in the Great Lakes or someplace many minutes steaming time from land, you're going to be fighting the fire or you're going to be abandoning ship immediately, which is generally a bad idea. Do your best to stay with the boat. So the idea of having enough on board to be able to fight your way into the engine room and then having more available to truly put out the fire, and you might have to fight yourself to the seat of the fire and then just cover it with dry chemical to put it away. The bottom line is it's not enough with the minimum. So I encourage you to think about it. On our boat, we've got 1 per space. Every stateroom's got 1, galley, etc. And then I've got a ginormous 40 BC, which is one of the big fat ones, like is on the wall in here, one of the big gigantic ones right next to the helm door. I've got another one that size in the cockpit, because another thing of Navy culture for me is the rescue and assistance detail, which is the team on any ship that's ready to go down the pier and fight a fire on somebody else's ship. I want to be able to do that for any one of the neighbors on the boats, not only because I care about my Marina neighbors, but also you've seen many examples of Marina fires in which the one boat catches multiple on fire. So by just like, city firefighters in any town, they're really not there to put the house fire out. They're there to save every other house around it. And so having more on board, I think, is essential. Similarly, the flooding question is something that, sorry, a question, sir.
You say with the back to the exit, right?
Yes, with your back to the,
But often, if it is an engine fire, that's also just a compartment where the staircase is to the exit.
yes, no, that's true. The question was, you should have one for every space so that you've got your back to the exit. You can grab the bottle to fight to escape, but also in the case of engine rooms, mostly you are opening a hatch, introducing air, and then having to fight your way in with multiple fire bottles to save the boat. In the back row, sir.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, are these slides available anywhere else?
The video is being recorded and will be on the YouTube channel of Herrington Marinas, so please subscribe to that. But I do not share the slides directly. They're proprietary for my business. And a question here, sir?
For many fires that I see being fought not on a boat, people like throw blankets.
Mm-hmm.
Is that?
Right. The question is the effectiveness of a fire blanket. I have one of those fire blankets in my boat. It's just on the back, because the most common use of a fire blanket is to immediately smother a Class Bravo fire. And so they're sold most commonly for like kitchen use. You just pull these two strings and rip the entire blanket out and toss them on top of, say, the grease fire on your stove, that sort of thing. So I've got it just, we've got a galley up and a couple of steps down into the main companionway. It is inside a locker right down. So if I ever had a fire in my galley, I take a couple steps down, grab that blanket, and would throw it on top. Now, getting the blanket into your engine room, et cetera, is probably not going to work. It's very effective for something that can be covered easily, like a stovetop fire. But I mean, a grease-containing stovetop fire in any of our boat galleys would be devastating if you didn't get to it immediately. So I encourage the purchase of one of those blankets. Yes, sir.
In our sailboat, the engine is, you have to go down the steps, and then it's got covered. You have to lift the steps off, and you have to unclip it and then open it.
Right.
I mean, realistically, if smoke is coming out of your engine, is it better to just get off the boat? Because that seems like you burn your hands and you get smoke.
The question is, the challenging access points. In my case, I've got this fast trawler where engine access is the sole of the main salon lifts up. In sailboats like all of ours, same deal, 2 or 3 companionway steps. You've got to unlatch that and get access to that small engine compartment. I'd say there's 2 options there. There's installed firefighting, which is certainly, an expensive option if it's not already there. Old days it was halon, now it's a modern ozone-friendly chemical that's there designed inside the compartment. There are other much more affordable ones called fire balls that you can mount in the overhead of the engine compartment, that in case of fire, that ball ruptures and drops like 5 or 6 pounds of dry chemical right on top of the engine. Very effective. But you're absolutely right. The question is, do you abandon ship if you see smoke? Depends on where you are. And I think generally a disabled boat with an engine fire that you've put out is a much safer place to be. And again, I'm thinking not just close in Chesapeake, but if you are offshore, you're miles away from help, every aspect of the search and rescue system is hours away, unless it's one of your fellow boaters. So I'm a huge fan of fight the fire, save the boat, not so much to preserve your asset, but to save the place that is keeping you afloat, dry, not swimming, et cetera. So that's why I'm a huge believer in firefighting. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, is your Facebook page Herrington North? Is that it?
There's Herrington Harbour North, I believe. And then the YouTube channel is Herrington Harbour.
Yeah, the YouTube channel is Herrington Harbour. And of course, spelled Harbour.
We are streaming on YouTube.
Yeah, and yeah, streaming on YouTube right now, and this entire video will be available. So, and then flooding, this is just the most likely, a 2-inch, my boat's a 42-foot fast trawler, so I've got several 3.5 and 4-inch raw water hoses. But just even on a smaller boat that's only got 2 inches of raw water hose, that's typically about 2 feet below the water line, if that hose pops off or ruptures, you've got a 111 gallons per minute flood coming in. You've got to get in there and stop the flooding. Your bilge pump rated at 1,000 gallons an hour, or maybe the little ones, 500 gallons an hour, is not going to multiply that by 60. That's how many gallons per hour are coming in. You've got to be ready to be able to stop and fight the flooding, which is a number of tools like, rescue tape or wooden wedges, plugs, etc. They make some great red pointy cone, kind of rubbery, soft, squishy material. I put Nerf there at the bottom because I've actually got a Nerf football in my damage control kit, because that conical shaped little bright green kids football will squeeze into any of my openings and jam it in there and stop it up. So bottom line is, time is of the essence. When seconds count, help for you and your boat is many, many, many minutes, maybe even hours away, depending on where you are. So be ready. All right, man overboard is the last of these emergencies. I'm keeping this basic again. This is an under power discussion specifically. If under sail, there are also some techniques for maneuvering while dousing sail and positioning for recovery, etc. I'm not going into those today because this is kind of power focused. But bottom line is, first, stay in the boat. Do not jump into help. Generally, whatever technique you use, you can't go wrong by just quickly making a circle. You're going to minimize distance between you and the person. Please note, I'm not being sexist. I think the phrase man overboard is well established, not just in the Navy. So I think if you scream out person overboard, it will be less effective, I think, to let everybody know. But this is part of our onboard pre-safety brief every single time we get underway with any new guests on board. And I remind them that whoever sees the person fall overboard, their number one job is to scream man overboard, because either I'm on the flying bridge or in the main helm, they may be somewhere else. And then once they've seen it, their job from that point on is to stand in a place that's visible to me at the helm and point at the person. Because as I'm maneuvering, getting a throw ring ready or getting the throw rope, that little bright green one, I've got that right next to the helm station as well. When I'm doing all that, it's possible I'll lose sight of the person in the water. Their job is to point. So generally there's a debate of, do you position upwind or downwind? Just get close to the person and then just go into neutral. You're not going to run the person down. You're not going to chop them up. You just need to get there within range and get something to them to get them on board. Then the photo there is a man throwing the life ring with an attached line. Another plus about, the minimums aren't enough. We've all got a requirement for a throwable Type 5 PFD. For those considering the Great Loop, I look to Canada's requirements that they direct for their life rings require a floating line to be attached of 75 feet. So when you throw the line, then you can bring them back. And then of course, the ABYC standards require all boats to have a ladder that can be deployed by the swimmer in the water. We're not going to dig into the recovery methods, but you see up there, the life sling is very effective for doing a series of circles, and just like picking up a skier, eventually that float is going to be there. A lot of sailboats are at an advantage there, because if the person is unconscious, you've got to think about what's your plan about getting an adult on board on the swim platform or over the rail. Sailboaters have got the main sheet, multi-part, 3-to-1, 4-to-1, 5-to-1 tackle that can easily be detached from the traveler, hooked into the rings on the life sling. It's under the person's arms, and then they can hoist the person up easily. Without that, those of us in powerboats have got to think about an effective way to get an unconscious person back on board. All right, now we'll jump into the heavy parts of communications, since we dug into the safety pieces. Any questions on any of those safety stuff? I was passionately talking about man overboard. And I had one man overboard in my career, and we did recover him, but it was, had always been throughout my career kind of the source of nightmares for me, is losing one of my sailors. And it was when I was in command of a destroyer. We got him back, but we practiced constantly for it. But and also another great practice opportunity for man overboard is the ubiquitous surprise in the Chesapeake Bay of a deflated Mylar balloon. Every single, not only I love getting the pollution out of the bay, but every time I see that or similar piece of plastic debris or something like that, it is a great opportunity. And I, Navy geek that I am, launch the entire boat, no matter what we're doing, into a man overboard recovery practice. We do the maneuver, we get the pole out and recover the Mylar balloon. Great ship handling practice, because moving close to a stationary small object, close enough that you can get a boat hook on them, is a challenging boat handling skill. And there's only one way to get better at it. It's practice in open water. So please not only clean up the bay, but great opportunity to practice. And then certainly if you want with your own, family and crew, toss a life ring out in the water and then make multiple approaches on it until you and your crew is comfortable recovering it. So we're going to dig into communications, and I will note that after the winter lecture series, Brad sends out a survey to everybody who's attended this and all the other lectures in the winter series at Herrington Harbour. And from those lectures, I have updated every year this lecture as well as the navigation one this afternoon. And that second sub-bullet, what electronics do we really need, was a common question from 2 or 3 people last year. And so not only do I cover it today as well as in the navigation lecture, but I wrote a really long deep dive article on the website for it that goes into every single option of what you'll need. So we'll cover that, but please, the foot stomp there is please fill out your surveys at the end, and for those of you online as well, so that we can make this and the other lectures in the series better going forward. So crew resource management, sorry that got cut off a little at the top there, is derived from, in the aviation world, they've been doing cockpit resource management for many years. It's all about management leadership, but most importantly, effective communications and decision-making in the cockpit. It's been adopted years later after the aviation folks started it decades ago into both commercial shipping and the Navy as bridge resource management. For those of you in the room who might be in medicine or transportation, firefighting, or other high-risk industries, many of them have derived their procedures from that original cockpit resource management. And I'll talk about these key fundamentals because to me they're essential of keeping your boat safe, but also safe and happy. And I think anybody can do this. It doesn't take professional career experience, but it requires, in some ways, kind of talking in advance. Hey, how are we going to go over? Let's talk through a scenario. Let's talk about code words or key instructions that crew and helmsman might need in those situations. There's plenty of checklists out there and recommended phrases. I don't want to get into those. To me, it's what works best for you and your crew. But starting with the clarity in roles, there can only be one captain. And for those of you who've got very similar boating skills, just decide and brief it up front and talk about it. It's like, okay, today I'm the skipper, so I get 51% of the vote. I'm making primary decisions, etc. On the next leg of our multi-leg trip, you're going to be the captain that day, and you're going to execute voyage plans and stuff like that. But I'm also a big believer in cross training. There's way too many examples in the boating blogosphere and marine tragedy articles in which, in those many cases where there is, spouse or partner, one who's got a high level of boating skill and the other not as much, that, they end up in a routine in which the primary skill haver is the one who always gets the boat underway, is the one who always is at the helm for anchorages, et cetera, et cetera. And in those sad situations in which that primary boater is incapacitated with illness or medical emergency or is in the water, that less trained and not cross-trained person is, sadly in many cases, tragically unable to assist. And, worst case, the knowledgeable boater is the one who drowns or dies or whatever, and that boat is adrift. And in some cases, that lesser trained, non-cross-trained boater is the one who can't even make the proper call on the VHF radio to get help. So to me, cross-training is absolutely essential. And for anybody in the room who is that not quite as experienced person, inject yourself repeatedly and get the training for anything you're not comfortable. And imagine, again, that tragic scenario in which your primary boater is no longer available, or at least incapacitated in such a way that you would have to do the following things. To me, that's start the engine, get underway, talk effectively on the radio, know how to do a man overboard recovery, that sort of thing. Pre-briefs every time, and this is not because, maybe it is because I spent so much time in the Navy, but we do pre-briefs every single time we get underway. If there's new people on board, or if my wife Ashley and I are going someplace new, we go over the voyage plan, we review the chart, we review the track, we load the track, we talk about bailout options, we talk about alternative anchorages, et cetera. Here's where we're going, here's expected arrival time, we brief it all. And then for those guests on board, we brief those man overboard procedures, we brief the, how to use the head. To a few little, you probably all experienced some tragic example of a guest not understanding how to use a marine toilet. Face forward, up when you're going up the ladder to the flying bridge, all those basics, we brief it every time. And then hint and hope there is in bold. That is, one of the fundamental things that the cockpit resource management and bridge resource management training tries to identify. There's a famous example of an on the aircraft tarmac collision in which first officer says to the pilot, "Man, I don't think I've ever seen, Omaha's airport this dark before." That's hint and hope as they were beginning to accelerate down the runway. The reason is they were on the taxiway. They were not on the runway, the normal lights, et cetera, that the first officer was used to seeing. And so similarly, in any partner boating situation, it is not good to say, "Yeah, the engine sounded a little bad," or it's like, "Man, we might be a little close to that buoy." It's instead, you've got to be clear with what you're seeing, because the helmsman may not be seeing that. It's like, "We are getting blown down onto that buoy, come left now." Or that vessel that we're crossing the path of is constant bearing, decreasing range, come right now. Not, "Hey, honey, don't you think that's getting a little close? What's your plan?" I mean, be clear, because, and when I was when I wrote the commanding officer standing orders for my ship, the number one, literally the first paragraph was a directive to the entire crew had to read these standing orders, a couple dozen pages of the basic fundamentals of my expectations. The number one paragraph was written for every sailor on board, which was, no matter what your rating is, which is the job specialty in the Navy, no matter how much time you have on board or your rank, your seniority in the Navy, you and you alone may be the person who, smells, hears, feels something that just doesn't seem right. If you read Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink, then you know that human instinct to detect anomalies, our ability to do pattern recognition, is something that humans do better than any machine. And if it just doesn't feel right, you've got to, through cross-training, pre-briefing, and discussing things with your crew, encourage even those brand new guests on board. If something doesn't seem right, let me, the captain, know. And I may say, oh yeah, that's supposed to do that. Or yeah, that vibration you're feeling is because I just turned on the generator or something like that. But knowing and being able to decide is far better. And you've got to create an environment through that pre-brief to encourage people to speak up. Again, codify your procedures. That's, come up with checklists if you want, come up with procedures, agree on how you want to do it. And then we do lots of repeat backs in the Navy, and they're kind of geeky. You see them on movies, etc. Give direction, send overall lines because the ship's 500 feet long and you're communicating through little communications channels. And now all the ropes go, all 6 of them, to the pier. Take in all lines. The repeat back is take in all lines, aye. But more important, and we do this on our boat, we don't do the take in all lines, aye sort of stuff. My wife would kill me. But what we do is, when we've made assignments, especially with guests, et cetera, it's like, okay, I want you to take care of the bow lines. I want you to take care of the stern lines. Wait until I give you the instruction. Now I'm ready. I have engines running, done my little bow thruster checks or whatever. And it's like, okay, take in all lines. Or if we're, leaving our dock at the house, send over all lines, leave all lines on the dock. Everybody's working, but then I brief them in advance. Report to me when you're done. So I'll hear all lines clear forward, all lines clear aft, all lines clear. So I, who might not be able to see every corner, I know that. Those examples of repeat backs to confirm what you need to know. And I'm fortunate that our boat has got excellent sight lines from both helm locations. We've got a flying bridge and a main helm. Not all boats are designed like that. And frequently you don't have good sight lines to some corner of the boat where somebody's doing line handling, et cetera, and getting underway with the line still attached to the dock or something like that has happened to many of us. It's happened to me. And that's just one of many examples. And then, discuss the plan. And of course, one of the key things of an Army colonel many years ago coined the phrase, the OODA loop, OODA, which is observe, orient, decide, act. It's okay to have a change in the plan, whether it's the plan that you briefed or, you're coming into a marina and you talk, you hear from the dock master, it's like, yep, you're at slip so-and-so. You've already got that marina's diagram pulled up on your from their website, or you've gone to the waterway guide where they've got the diagram in paper that you carry on board, or you've gone to the waterway guide app and they've got a top-down view, and he just told you you're going into slip 17 and you can see on the diagram, or you ask them on the radio if you don't have that diagram, is that a starboard side 2 or port side 2? You and your crew had already laid out port side. You've just changed the plan. You stop, I'll stop, give everybody a minute. This is now starboard side 2, shift all lines to the starboard cleats and get ready. So discuss the plan and let them know what's happening. All right, and then in that photo, we'll get into those a little more in the must-have, should-have, like-to-have. That's a crew member wearing the EarTech brand of two-way hands-free headsets. There's several other good brands available out there, but their nickname is Marriage Savers for a reason. They open the comms up, they free both hands, they reduce the need to yell, which is absolutely a well-established added factor that induces stress in some listeners. If someone raises their voice, our boat's only 42 feet long, but depending on wind conditions or whatever, if I stick my head out of the helmsman's side door to get someone's attention all the way on the bow or in the cockpit, I might have to yell. And that is discouraged in this establishment. So, all right, next slide, there we go. So this chart is on the article on the website that I wrote and added these slides specifically in response to survey responses from last year's survey. And the request was, all right, with all of the stuff out there and being assaulted by all the great ads in boating magazines and at boat shows, what, no kidding, are the electronics that recreational boaters really need on their boat. I cover navigation electronics in the afternoon navigation lesson. The focus here will be on communications stuff. But I mean, bottom line is too many boating trade publications, websites try to convince us that, you know, we need an electronic suite on our boat that resembles the pilot house of a cruise ship. We certainly do not. But the good news is, you know, the costs are coming down in many electronics, but with the ever increasing complexity and features, how do we narrow down what we really need? So in response to that query, this section in the lecture, but also again, deep dive article that's really long, that goes very deep into the why behind each of these items, does some trade-off discussions, et cetera. But I rank them from left to right in required, must have, should have, like to have. Now, the other piece is at the top of the slide, you see the key training axiom from the aviation industry. Commercial, civil, military pilots are all trained in these key tenets. Any aviators, any pilots in the room? I'm not, but there frequently are. There's a common crossover between those who are either commercial or private pilots and long-range cruising boaters. So I include that here, but it's great. Unfortunately, aviate, navigate, communicate is the thing which for the pilots, it is, you know, the three key tenets in priority order, which, and especially in response to any mishap or emergency in flight. Aviate means keep the aircraft flying using flight controls and instruments while you work it out. Navigate, of course, determine your location and maneuver safely. Both aircraft and vessels have the same goal: don't hit the ground and avoid collisions. And then finally, communicate. Now with the aviation world, that's generally informed outside the aircraft, like tell air traffic control what's happening. But in the case of multi-pilot aircraft or our vessels with more than one person on board, you know, communicating with your crew with clear and succinct communications. And then of course, just like that Army OODA loop of observe, orient, decide, act, which is a constant loop that I do when I'm on watch at the helm on our boat, this aviate, navigate, communicate is what I'm constantly doing. Though of course, aviate and steer don't rhyme. I wish there was a cool boaty word that ended with ate. So steer, navigate, and communicate are the three categories ranked by what I believe are, no kidding, required, must have, and then should have, and then like to have. And then in the article, there's a few that are kind of off the page, which is don't need it. And I discuss some of those in which either the technology isn't quite ready or not quite worth the hype. I'll go into those, but not today. So today we'll focus on communications, but let me be clear that, you know, if you're communicating and this is all you've got, many of our passage-making heroes have cruised the world in recreational-sized power vessels or sailboats without radar, autopilot, single sideband, sat phones, Starlink, et cetera. The cost is going down, which lets us, and I want to be budget conscious always, let some of us be able to afford a little further to the right on the chart, but you absolutely don't need anything more than the required section to truly be safe. Oh, right. Question online? Yep.
Question they were asking, what is MMSI?
We will get into MMSI in a subsequent slide, but thank you for the question. That was from the online folks. I will dig into that. I dig into most of these in depth, and then again the navigation stuff. And you had a question, sir, or were you just saving me for now? Okay, yes, sir, in the back.
Just back to the steering. Can you elaborate on the remote heading display?
Sure. Yeah. The steering question is, what about the remote heading display? That's where, you know, by assumption, I go into the article. It's like you've got to have a compass. If you've already got a network navigation system, then you've got a digital compass somewhere buried deep under some down low center cabinet. I believe autopilot is a must-have because that frees up the helmsman to do what I'd rather them doing, is navigating, communicating, and avoiding collisions. Rudder angle indicator, of course, you really need to know where your rudder is. And then the remote heading display is, you know, to me, depending on the size of the vessel, you may not need it, but having your heading displayed in some other location is completely a luxury to me, where I would love to, in the master stateroom, be able to have heading displayed on the wall so that if I'm taking a little cat nap while my crew is driving and I knew what our course was and I felt the turn and I just wake up and open one eye, I can see it's like, that's not our track. What's going on? I might get up. And again, that's a luxury. That's why it's in the like to have area. Also with, with some vessels that truly have like a pilot house configuration. Some boats have got a big, row of key instrument displays right across the header above that. Great thing where, if I'm down in the salon, my boat is not that big to have those displayed. But if I had such a boat, it would be nice to just lean over and look up the stairway to the pilot house and just visually check the course. But the reason I have it in there and talk about it in the article is it'd really be nice. Now, there's also, you don't have to have a digital readout. They make some really nice, either wall mounted, common in the sailboats, where you cut a hole and you plug a compass in the actual bulkhead, common in, sailboat cockpits, or there's some beautifully designed ceiling magnetic compasses where it literally could be right above your head. And it's, deliberately, and all the numbers are inverted. So you just look up and you're like, okay, I can see that we're still on course 170. I can go back to and get another 10 minutes of sleep. All right. So now we will dive into these. And again, the full article is available on the website. So on the, okay, good. That previous chart of required electronics emphasized a 25-watt radio. Installed is in italics as the first bullet there, to emphasize the fact that a handheld VHF at either 5 or 6 watts is absolutely no substitute for an installed VHF like the one that you see in the photo. Most VHF handhelds, typical are 5. That one, this standard Horizon one I recently bought is 6-watter, which gives you, 7 miles, 8 miles maybe. 5 watts at 6 watts, you might get 10-ish miles, but also with shorter battery life with a 6-watter. Installed radios are set at 25 watts for most channels, except the few that are limited by law to 1 watt for short-range comms. In that second bullet there, USA channels, which are the alpha channels, if you see them on the display of your radio, most radios, or all radios still today, this is about to change if you're buying new radios, have the 3-button toggle. Either it'll show USA International Canada, or some say UIC, eventually transitioning to the 4 digits, which we'll talk to in a minute. But in those cases, there are multiple channels in which different countries have slightly different frequencies. And if your radio is set in the wrong mode, what's wrong with this picture? If we're steaming in the Chesapeake Bay, trying to talk on some of those channels, and we're accidentally in international, which is the I of USA International Canada, then there are some channels. 16 works. All of the emergency safety channels, 16, 9, and 13, all are common globally. But some of the other channels within the radio that are still very commonly used as working channels or government-specific channels, et cetera, if you do not have your radio set in the US, and if you do the Great Loop, as soon as you cross the border, switch to the C, because a handful of channels will only work there. Now, the in red there, transitioning to 4 channels, 4-digit channels. I recently bought this new handheld VHF last year, and it's new enough that it shows 4 digits, meaning in front of some of the channels is a little tiny 10, like channel 22, 1022. All radios are eventually going to transition to that. The deadline is January 1st, 2028. That's for all commercial ships, the big guys who are required to have the full-blown GMDSS safety suite, which is the Global Marine Distress and Safety System, GMDSS. Their comm suites are required to transition fully to 4-digit channels. Newer radios can actually be reprogrammed. I'm certain MTS will be doing a good business in a few years of updating the software, but no impact immediately for those cruising in the US only. For those cruising internationally after 2028, some of those working channels won't work when talking to government shore stations, et cetera. So if you're planning to do the Great Loop in 2028 or beyond, you may need to upgrade at least one of your radios on board to a new one. Yes, sir.
What's the best way to do a radio check?
Okay, radio, I may get to that in the next thing, but do not do a radio check on channel 16. Channel 9 is ideal. Unfortunately, we used to have, I think it was on channel 26, there was this automated service with CTO with an antenna kind of between here and Baltimore where you could key the mic. There's still places in the country that still have this service, but they had this computer recording device where you could key the mic, say, you know, this is Andiamo radio check from Herrington Harbour on 26, unkey, and like 2 seconds later, you would hear your own voice come back to you. I'm so bummed that they stopped doing that. I'm not sure why, but yeah, the best way is do it on channel 9. And channel 9 was, you know, invented by the FCC as the recreational boating calling channel. It really has not been adopted, and which is a shame. A lot of marinas still show we're on 16 and 9. 9 times out of 10, when I have started there, tried to call somebody on 9, marinas occasionally will answer up, but generally 16 remains the default. But you absolutely should not do a radio check on 16. Occasionally the young petty officer on watch will chastise the boaters for doing that. You shouldn't do it. You should pick an alternative, or you can call another, you know, call a marina nearby, et cetera, call another boat. But I rarely do radio checks, and you will see throughout this lecture and the one this afternoon, I'm a super geek on procedures and backups and a backup to the backup. If you turn on your radio and it powers up and it displays GPS and you can hear any traffic, you have just tested and validated 99% of potential failures. Your antenna, the variable standing wave ratio in the cable, the connectors, the power, all that stuff is validated by hearing any traffic. And the nice thing is you can kind of, especially on channel 13, you can hear vessels, you know, coming in and out of Baltimore, pilots talking to each other. And those are, 13 is by law a 1-watt channel. And so if you've got 13 on, which I encourage we'll get to later, always have 16 and 13 on your radios. If you're hearing on 13, then you're getting the weakest 1-watt signals that are designed to be only short range. You're in good shape. And the only thing then that could have failed was the transmit side of the transceiver in your radio. Incredibly unlikely. So I rarely do a radio check. I definitely don't do it underway. There's tons of stuff that I do as part of my getting underway checklist, but that's not it. Yeah, just the general how to talk on the radio kind of thing. Again, another deep dive article on the website that gets into the true geekery and esoterics of this. I don't want to bore you with all of that, but you know, select your channel. And you know, we talked about 9. Very few people are monitoring 9. I've got 16 and 13 always on. And foot stomp on 13 for bridge to bridge. That is designed, not so much physical bridges like drawbridges, but they're also on 13. But it's for the bridge of my ship and the bridge of your ship. Still applies to recreational stuff. It's a 1-watt channel. It's not a hailing channel. It is by definition, I'll get you a sec, sir. It is by definition the hailing and simultaneous working channel solely dedicated for the purpose of doing passing arrangements and navigation-specific discussions between 2 vessels in close proximity to each other. That's why it's only 1 watt. And so 100% of the time, you call a commercial vessel, if you want to do a passing arrangement, they will answer you on 13 1,000 times faster than they're on 16. And then if you're cruising in areas of the country, like New York Harbor, the approaches to and through the Chesapeake Delaware Canal that are controlled by law, vessel traffic service areas, VTS, those ships are required to monitor the VTS channel first and 13 secondary. They are not required by law to even be on 16 if they're in the VTS zone. So if you are anywhere in New York Harbor, there's 3 different VTS zones for East River and the Hudson and the outer approaches all the way out to Sandy Hook. Those ships, tugs, et cetera, are on 14 or 17 or 18 and 13. They're not on 16. And if you call them on 16, the pilots, if you're trying to talk to, usually there should be little need to talk to a ship that's transiting the channel. But if you need to talk to a commercial vessel, tug, et cetera, and then with any of the rest of us, if you need to talk to Andiamo, I will always be on 13 and will answer right up to talk about port-to-port passage. Yes, sir, you have a question.
So what happens if the other boat left channel 16 with the right keyed on? What should you be doing?
Okay, you have now triggered, the question is what happens if another boat out there is on channel 16 and somehow their mic is keyed? All these channels are simplex channels, which means there's only one frequency, 16, there's only one. You talk, you've just occupied it with 25 watts banging. Everybody within 10 to 15 miles, depending on your antenna height, can hear you. And then you unkey the mic and now it's available. That's why you have to, when you dial up 16, wait a little bit, make sure nobody's already on there. If there is some knucklehead out there whose monitor or button is keyed, within a closer range, unless he's right next to you, your 25 watts can overpower the distant key. It's annoying, but you're definitely losing effective range. But God bless them. The Coast Guard watchstanders who pull out the little script, say, mariners, you've got a constant key on 16. Please check your equipment. What vessel didn't hear that? The guy or gal with the button key. These are simplex channels. So please, God, Coast Guard, stop doing that stupid thing. Yes, it's frustrating. They have the ability to do direction finding. They're the occasion, it's a lot of work to get a small cutter underway with the direction finder. But when it's, instead of the constant key, it's little kids down below just playing for hours and hours and saying crazy stuff, that's when they break out the direction finder and put it in a vehicle and cruise the marina and then walk down the pier and it points and they know who's done it. But it's a lot of work for them and it takes hours of constant playing and transmission. But yes, there's nothing we can do. But yeah, don't do that. So yeah, you key the mic, you speak slowly and clearly. In this case, I'm calling the vessel Beagle. My boat's name is Andiamo. Beagle, Beagle, Beagle. This is Andiamo, channel 16 over. I say the number because those of us who've got either multiple radios or you've got dual watch on, and we'll talk about dual watch on the next slide, your radio's blinking or lets you know which channel is being called on. But especially if you're calling a commercial vessel, they have multiple radios tuned to different traffic, a bridge that might be 40 feet wide. They need to know which radio to walk to and grab, so you remind them it's on channel 16. You let go, and then you wait for a response. Then you repeat your message again, you wait another response. You're not going to get them. If they haven't answered you by now, then you clear the channel, like you release it to the rest of the world. This is Andiamo, nothing heard out. And then if they respond, then get off of channel 16. If you're doing a discussion on 9, it's still a hailing channel, but so few people are on it, you could probably have 30-second conversation. But on 16, you have to move to a working channel. If you've called a commercial ship or a drawbridge, or if you've called any of the boaters here after today who know the importance of channel 13 for maneuvering discussions, and you call somebody on 13, you don't have to shift to a working channel. Have your entire conversation. Hey, I see you coming down. This is the red hulled so-and-so, or if you've got AIS, you tell them your name. The commercial vessel could see you. I see you coming down. I'm going to meet you in this next turn. And if you're on the Western Rivers, on the Great Loop, and it's a tug with 20 barges, you need to ask them, where do you want me, Captain? Yeah, I'll meet you on 1. Well, then you've got to know enough about the rules of the road to know that a 1 whistle means a port-to-port passage, back to crew resource management, and repeat backs whenever, and I'm from Tennessee, so I can say good old boy, whenever some good old boy commercial operator, tugboat dude says, yeah, Cab, I'll meet you on 1. My response, again, I'm from Tennessee, I can mimic that accent. My response is, Roger, Captain, concur. I will meet you on a one whistle port-to-port passage. I repeat back to eliminate any confusion, and in case maybe he forgot the rules of the road that day, that's part of the repeat back. And then I clear the channel, nothing heard out, or shift and answer, whatever channel. You'll note that I say I'm 6'8", not 68, at an extreme distant, even though VHF radios are incredibly clear, much better than they used to be years ago, still spelling out double numbers like 6'8", 6'9", 7'1", 7'2". On the next slide, we'll get to what channels you're allowed to use, and there's a whole bunch that you are forbidden by law from using. These are generally the working channels there. And then sign off, and then let the world know, you're clear 6'8", so then the fishing guys can get back to talking about, their fish catch that day on 6'8", and then where am I standing by, channel 16 and 13. And then just of note, only a few people in the room probably have boats that are greater than 20 meters in the room. If you do, you are required to get what's called a ship station license that also gets you the MMSI number. We'll get to that in a later slide. Or if you're going to do the Great Loop, go to the Bahamas, etc., you cannot communicate on the Marine VHF radio band in any way in another country without having the FCC license. It's very simple. It used to require a course. Now you just apply for it, take a small test online, and you get your number. And then same with the operator permit, same rules, etc. A few of you, especially in the sailboat world, might have HF single sideband for long range. Then that means you've already got that because you can't get that license without a permit. So those are all the requirements. Plenty of people go happily on the Great Loop without doing that. I'm a big fan in following the rules and representing the United States by fully complying with international law. So if you're going to do the Great Loop, think in advance for getting your real MMSI number. We'll talk about that next. So down the basics, actually let me pause on MMSI. I think it comes in a later lesson, or a later slide, but I don't see. I thought it was coming next, so I'll talk about it for a second. The MMSI number is the number that identifies your boat digitally, and it's attached to the boat, not the person. So if you sell the boat, the MMSI number stays with the boat. However, buried in your MMSI number and stored in the database is name, emergency contact number, the description of your boat, so that when you hit the red distress button and it transmits your position, it's also transmitting your number. They can look that up and they know that Andiamo is a white over blue hulled fast trawler with a flying bridge, because all that is written in the notes pages. If you've bought the boat from someone else, it's also got emergency contact information, et cetera, and the names, and you haven't had the previous owner. Usually that's part of the closing paperwork. If you buy a used boat, is the documentation that releases the MMSI number from the previous owner to you. If you bought a boat and haven't done that, or check if you've got an MMSI number, let's hope. If you don't, then a lot of the distress features are not going to work. But that's it, and it's it's the thing that digitally lets people know who you are. Now, in some VHF radios, this one also has the red distress button on the back, which means this is a digital selective calling capable radio. It's also got the MMSI number loaded in it. And in this case, you've got two options. You can either, if you always want to consider this like the dinghy, the tender radio, then you can get another MMSI number just for the dinghy. And in that description, it would be 12-foot gray PDC rigid hull deflatable. Or you decide that this is going to be just the backup for your own boat, and you load the same MMSI number in this radio as for the boat, as is in your chart plotter and your AIS, etc. The same MMSI number must be in all the electronics on board. Question in the back, and then I'll get to you.
Do you have any take on for a small handheld radio like that using something like a Falcon?
Like a what?
Falcon, like Chinese radios that they got a ton of channels on them. They're kind of like a handheld ham radio.
Oh, yeah, I'm not familiar with, the question was, what about, an alternative for maybe this particular name, Baofeng, a Chinese-made that has more than just the marine band channels, it sounds like, on it. It's like a little mini ham, may even get into the mid-frequency MF or high-frequency HF, big fat waves. As long as it's got the marine channels on it, these are distinct frequencies specifically reserved only for marine use, then you're fine to use it. It wouldn't do anything weird. But would it have the full digital selective calling emergency features? I'm not sure about that. I'm not familiar with that product. Sir?
If you run as a emergency beacon on it, does that have an MSI numbers attached to it?
If what has a beacon on it?
Yeah, the emergency EPI.
Oh, yeah. If it's an EPIRB, et cetera. The question was, if you've got an emergency beacon, like a personnel locator beacon or an EPIRB, we'll get to that in the safety equipment electronics a little later. Yes, the MMSI number is the boat's number. So your EPIRB, your AIS, and all of the VHF radios on board have the same MMSI number stored in them. It's the identifier. So if you buy one new, now there are rental services available through Boat US and others. If you're taking a trip and you're going to do offshore, but it's only the one offshore in the next 10 years you're going to do, you can rent an EPIRB. Again, they're going to ask you what's your MMSI number. They'll program it before they ship it to you, and then you ship it back when you're done.
So if you want to use both, you should check and see if they have MSI numbers.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Let me just jump to, hold on. So yeah, here's the external comms, and yeah, there we go. Yeah, so now I knew it. Okay, there it is. So here's the key to the MMSI, is that, and that's what it stands for, Maritime Mobile Service Identity Number. It is all part, they were, created maybe 20 years ago by the International Maritime Organization to identify ships. On ships, they've got even more data stored in them. For recreational vessels, it's mostly contact information, description of the vessel, et cetera, size, that sort of thing. But if the absolute top right picture is the radio that was on my boat, which is a 2005 Legacy 42 trawler. When I bought the boat in 2018, that's what my old ICOM M602 looked like. When I went to the digital selective calling menu, which is the entire safety network that is embedded in all of these new electronics, this is a digital selective calling radio. This distress button, it's got a nice little safety flap so I don't generate an emergency by accident, lets us press a button, lift that flap and press the button, and your radio transmits to every vessel and to huge Coast Guard towers nearby your position, name of your boat, and the description, because when the MMSI number was created, you had a chance online to enter all that stuff. If you've bought a boat and what's wrong with this picture up there, that's what mine looked like. The previous owner, he was the original owner, I bought it from him, had been cruising in that boat, and it was in Florida. He did a lot of offshore work. He'd been cruising in that boat completely unprotected by the digital selective calling resources that are available behind that red button on every one of our radios. Nobody in here has a radio, very, very unlikely, that doesn't have digital selective calling. However, it needs two things. GPS cable plugged into the back of it. If it's got a red button, it's expecting GPS because you've got to transmit where you are. That's the key to the emergency. It lights up. If there's a real MMSI distress call, every one of our chart plotters, if they're within range, lights up. Some different brands do different things, but if there's one that's within the zoom view that I've got on my screen and somebody does an alert, that target appears, turns on, and starts blinking, has a red circle or a red box around it. You know where the person is. And that's the beauty of digital selective calling. Sure, the Coast Guard's going to get alerted and they're going to call you immediately because your MMSI number has the boat name in it. So back to your question is, what if you bought a boat from somebody else, a used boat? You've changed the name, and if you do not go into the Coast Guard MMSI database and update the information with your new boat name, if you've painted it, the new color, your contact information, your emergency contact phone numbers, all that stuff. And if GPS is not wired in, a different screen shows, I think I've got a picture of that, there we go. What's wrong with that picture? I have walked the docks at Herrington South many times on other friends' boats and stepped aboard, and I always look because I'm a geek. And if I see either a row of zeros or no position, no time, that means GPS is not wired to the back of that radio. And the day that they have some tragedy on board and lift that red flap and press the button, in this case, that's the worst. MMSI number at the wrong name, yeah, that would suck. That's too bad. They're going to show up and you've painted your boat and they're looking for a white boat. That's going to add a couple minutes. If you do not have GPS wired into the back of your radio and your radio has zeros or no position, no time, you are in danger, because when you're sinking and just before the batteries get covered by water and all the electronics are gone, you're going to press and hold that button underneath the red flap for 3 to 5 seconds until you hear the beep. And all the information needed to save you is now transmitted to every boat around you and the Coast Guard. And if you see that, then you're in big trouble. So, sir, question?
Quick question online. They just wanted you to confirm that you're saying to use channel 13 for basic communication and not 16.
No, well, 13 here it is. The question is online. Should you use 13 for basic communications? You should use 13 for vessel to vessel navigation instructions and discussions. So the primary use of that is when you're making passing arrangements. You see ahead of you in a narrow channel a vessel that's driving right down the middle, instead of, per the rules, staying to the right side. You call them on the radio. If you've got AIS and so do they, you can call them by name and you say, hey, this is Andiamo. I see you passing buoys 4 and 6. Propose a 1 whistle port-to-port passage. Roger, Captain, that's it. That conversation happens on 13, or bridges and locks. They are the working channel, and this little photo at the bottom right shows the bridge at Kent Narrows, and this blue sign right here shows channel 6, 8, and 13. That's saying that the bridge is not on 16. The bridge is monitoring 13 and 6, 8 all the time. And if you need to call them and request an opening at their next scheduled open, then those are the channels. Another question?
One more question. Yeah.
Yep.
They've asked how you register your MMSI.
How do you register an MMSI? There's 2 ways to do it. For a U.S. vessel, if you never plan to leave the United States, then you can get, if you're a Boat US member, you get them for free. If you're a non-member, Boat US has a service for $25 that they will issue you an MMSI number. However, the one that they issue is a smaller block of numbers issued to them as an agent of the FCC that is not authorized for international use. So if you're planning on going, if you're over 20 meters or you're planning on going outside the United States at any point, you need a real MMSI number, and that is done on the FCC website, Federal Communications Commission. So here's all the stuff, how to talk on the radio. Major foot stomp, pet peeve, and it's not just because I was in the Navy. Roger, all that means is I understood what you just said, basically keep going. It doesn't mean yes, it doesn't mean I agree. There are other words for that, affirmative. Don't use that for yes, negative, no, or negative, I don't agree, etc. And I like the word concur, especially with navigation passage, etc. Over, that means I'm done talking, it's your turn. Aviators don't like this. My daughter's in flight school right now in Pensacola. She laughs at me because she's like, yeah, we don't use over much. I'm like, yes, I know you don't. Anyway, but radios have gotten a lot more clear back when we really had to say over in the HF days, high frequency stuff. Out means I am absolutely done. But pet peeve, foot stomp. Other than seeing this in like bad Hollywood movies and on TV, you cannot say over and out. Which is it? It's either over or it's out. You can only pick one. If you leave today with anything, God bless you, take that with you. It's either over or it's out. Yes. Thank you, Hollywood, for jacking us up. And then standby, very effective. You're holding the channel for a moment. It's like standby. I've got to get a number. I've got to check my note, and I'll get right back to you. I spell, for those of us who've got weird sounding boat names, or if you're providing a marina on a working channel with your last name because they can't find your reservation and you've got a hard to pronounce or hard to spell name, I spell Alpha November, Delta, India, Alpha, Mike, Oscar, Andiamo. You say the word before, you spell it phonetically, you say it after. Does this sound like military geekery? Maybe. But the key is, if someone, you have to spell it, and ANDIAMO, depending on the distance of transmission, might be written down incorrectly. And if it's something you're trying to transmit that has to be correct, then spelling it phonetically is a way to do it. The police use different ones. Instead of Foxtrot, they use Frank and weird stuff like that. But there is a defined, accepted this is not Navy stuff. This is internationally accepted phonetic alphabet. That's it. And then same with numbers. You spell them out. You say each digit separately, not channel 16. You say 16. And then true geekery in the maritime world are spelling out the numbers with distinct ways that cannot be mistaken. That's why 5 and 9 are different. That's why we say niner. We don't say 4, we say four. We don't say 3, we say tree, because the H's are a little fuzzy on the radio, that sort of stuff. I don't expect any of you to do that, but this is the proper way. And it's, international law, it's codified in US code, et cetera. So it's the right way to do it. And then for latitude, longitude, decimal is a very effective way to do it, because point might sound like a number. So my position, 48.23 north. You don't have to get way down into the stuff. A minute of latitude or latitude is a mile. And so if you get into a 1/10 of a minute, that's pretty close, and they're going to be able to find you. And then, of course, north or south. And then Wilco, again, sounds like Hollywood, but that is a regular thing, especially if you're talking to government folks or law enforcement or search and rescue. Wilco, it's not the same as I agree with you, concur. It's I'm going to do exactly what we just agreed to. I'm going to meet you at this time, Roger Wilco. I understood you, and I'm going to do it. Was there another question? I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
So copy is not a recognized term?
Copy is not. Yeah, Roger that is not. Copy is not. Roger means copy. Good copy, that's very slang, starting to sound like CB radio days or whatever. We don't need to say 10-4. We don't need to say good buddy. We don't need to say breaker or any of that CB radio stuff. All right, so we talked about power and the installed 25-watt systems before. Now antenna height is the other factor. And we talked about a few of those radio channels that are limited to 1 watt by design, like channel 13, only for close-in comms. But even if you've got a 6-watt radio, and which might get you at about 10 to 12 miles max on a perfect atmospheric day, but you're floating in the water with your waterproof radio trying to get rescued, or you're in the dinghy, then, and I'm not going to do public math too much, but if you can do the square root of a number, so I could do the square root of 9. If I'm on like the main deck, that's 3. If I'm on the main deck of my boat, or maybe on this cabin sole or something like that, I might be 9 feet I'm 6 feet tall, or if I'm in the cockpit, my radio antenna is 9 feet. Well, I can do that. That's square root of 9 is 3 times 1.22. It's a little over 3, maybe 4-ish. That is as far as this antenna in my hand will reach to the skin of the earth. Now, if there's another boat of the same height, or another person with their handheld equally high, then we can double that range. That's why fixed antennas, this one for me on my boat again, it happens to be 25. I didn't write that because I can do the square root of 25, which is 5. But so now I've got a much bigger number. Square root of 25 is 5 times 1.22. That's still kind of a modest number. It's like 6.6 6.8 miles. That's as far as the beam of my VHF radio can go. Now, VHF, this is where I truly will geek out just for an instant. The megahertz matters, the waves matter. And think of, if you're in the backyard as a kid and you're waving the garden hose, sending little waves down. Every time you move your hand, that's a wave. If you did it once a second, then that's 1 hertz. The VHF marine radio range is like 156 to 170 something in megahertz, 156 million hertz. That's you taking that garden hose and going that fast. That super tight wave with a really short wavelength, like a 10-meter wavelength, basically travels like a straight line. And therefore, that's why we talk of higher frequency radio communications like this as, and same with radar, line of sight. And so the radar horizon, they won't go through rocks. They're easily scattered by trees, et cetera. Same thing applies to the radar. So my radar can only see, can't do the square root of 17, but I can do 16. So 4 times 1.22. My radar can see 5 or 6 miles, but it can see an object that's taller at the equivalent range on the other side of that. So height matters and power. So both of them, that's why a handheld radio in your hand in the bridge or on deck is not going to get nearly as far at 5 or 6 watts as 25 watts booming, depending. And for those sailboaters, they've got it way up there at 60 feet. So that's great. Question? Yes, sir.
A lesson I learned the hard way is that antennas for sailboats are different than antennas for power boats.
They are, yeah.
And a rotoriously installed a power boat antenna on a sailboat.
Indeed.
Wasn't working with the dam, and they checked it, their own antenna.
Probably so, yeah. The question was, sailboat antennas, those are quarter dipoles, which are generally a big fat base that's got a coupler in it and a tall, skinny silver wire, as opposed to most power boats are 6-foot digital whips that are big fat white ones. They definitely do not work as well bolted to the top of an aluminum mast. Yeah, good question. So here are all the channels, and the ones you'll notice there's a few gaps in the list. Those are weird simplex only or receive only channels like 3 and 15. You don't have to worry about those. Your radio won't even tune to those. 70 is the data only channel that all those emergency digital selective calling data stream, it's a data call that goes booming out. But the ones that are shaded out, 21, 23, 61, 82, 81, 83, they are unlawful to be used by the general public in U.S. waters. And then weather channels, you see the weather channels are not overlaps of those. You get the weather channels, which are 1 through 10, only after you push the WX button, the weather button on your radio. And then you've got, depending on, I forget which one it is, I rarely listen to the weather anymore because I've got a great weather app, Windy, that I prefer to use than waiting for the computer voice to tell me what, Chesapeake Bay south of Sandy Point is. I'll just do it on my thing. But the key here is that you don't just get to pick a working channel to use. This is where we should be living to do all of our chit chats. When you call somebody on 16, let's go to 68, 69, 71, or 72. All the rest, as you can see, are occupied for various reasons for law enforcement, Coast Guard use, et cetera. You may need to talk to the Coast Guard or listen when Coast Guard on 16 talks about an emergent marine safety information broadcast, shift and answer 22 alpha. It's really shift and listen 22. And then we talked about the US versus Canada, et cetera. Alpha are the US frequencies. If your radio is not in USA mode, then when you get to 22, you'll be talking on like a 1/4 megahertz off. If you're in Canada or international European freaks, you will not be able to hear. So if you ever switch over and nothing's happening on 22, because they instantly switch over and give you that broadcast, then you're probably not in USA mode. Now, woven in here are also some of the rules to require mandatory watch and usage. The size of vessel that is absolutely required. Again, maybe there's one or two of us in the room here, not me, who's got a 66.5-foot vessel. You're required to have a radio. For the rest of us who happen to have radios on board, though not required, if the rule is, if you have a radio installed, you shall maintain a constant listening watch on 16. I'm encouraging to use everybody here, just like everybody here has a digital selective calling red button, everybody here has got a dual watch. It's either has the word dual on the button, or it's dual in the menu, or DW for dual watch. Every radio made now has a receive only, totally separate receiver inside the radio, permanently tuned to channel 16. So when you go to dual watch, you can then dial your radio to any other channel. I encourage that channel to be 13. So you're constantly listening simultaneously on 13 and 16. And if they call you on 16, 16 will blink. If they call you on 13, 13 will blink, or 13 will get bold depending on the brand. So you'll know which one to turn to answer a hail. But you will always be listening to every commercial vessel talking about their maneuvering intentions, and you'll also be listening to the mandatory requirement for all the code. Is there a question? Nope. Okay, great. All right. And then we jumped to this one a little earlier. This is the MMSI thing. I had a kind of checklist, sort of, here's how you do a report. But then I went to the Indianapolis Boat Show a few years ago, and the Coast Guard had a stack of these on the Coast Guard auxiliary desk, which I encourage you to pick one up at any boat show. It's a very handy thing to have. Got it stuck right next to the helm console, close to the radio. So part of, training, but also if we cross-train on the boat, but if the day it happened, my crew, I've never pushed the distress button, I want that there for them to use. Now, if you do need to make a report, and this, gives you, for non-DSC radios, pretty much everybody's got one now. This gives you the procedure, and I go into a little more deeply there on the right, kind of explaining the why behind it. They're all, the Mayday started out, it's a French word, and that's because where it was first invented was an airport in England that had regular flights to and from Paris in the early days of aviation. So they wanted to do a French word, help me, Mayday. And so we anglicize it and make it Mayday. And then the word panne is French for breakdown, like if your car breaks down on the side of the road, you're in panne. So we say it twice or we say it 3 times for each of those, panne, 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 Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. And then still French, sécurité, sécurité, sécurité. I don't expect anyone here to do the proper French accent, but it's not security, security. It's sécurité, sécurité. And listed there in the order of like urgency and importance and danger. Mayday's in red, no kidding, danger to life, your vessel's on fire, and then emphasis on the difference between man overboard that you're in the progress of recovering and a man overboard that's unlocated, like at night. Or you've lost sight on a rough day in a seaway or something. You want to summon as many people to come help you get that person because time is critical. If you're in progress, this also warns vessels nearby that your weird maneuvering is explained, et cetera. And then the lowest level security, you see some half of a dock afloat that got blown off by a storm or something like that. And then often you'll hear, especially on 13, commercial traffic, and I've occasionally used it. Not many marinas truly have a blind slip where you're about to pop out of a fairway and get surprised by traffic, but certainly you see commercial ships warning that they're getting underway. Yes, sir, question?
On your pan one, dragging anchor, is that me telling another boat they're dragging, or the one that's being dragged?
I would do it if I was dragging anchor, but certainly, yeah, if you couldn't, warning people in a big anchorage that a vessel nearby is dragging, absolutely. That alerts everybody who's at anchor and still has their radio on that they're at risk and they may need to stand by. That's a great question. Would you report pan if you were dragging anchor or for someone else? I'd say both situations. All right, there we go. And then DSC, the digital selective calling features of your radio, also have these other very underutilized things that I find very handy. You know, it's a digital call that's happening. And so you can load anybody's, if you've got an MMSI number and you know what their number is, you go down the dock and you're about to get underway with a buddy boat and you want to be able to have private digital conversations with their boat only, then you load, enter and save the boat's name, or you can, you know, put a person's name, Karen and Bob, whatever. These are screenshots from standard Horizon, but everybody's got a similar menu where you're setting up an individual name and number, or you're setting up a group. So you're doing a little flotilla with half a dozen boats, or the yacht club or something like that. You can all set up the group. So, you know, the navigator for the group or whatever can do a group call, hit call group, you select one of these few channels that are available. And please note that these are digital uses of 6, 8, and 9. Like the rest of the world can still talk on 6 while you guys are having a digital conversation. It's multiplexed, just like our cell phones. We, you know, 100 people, 1,000 people probably can be on the same frequency because the call is all multiplexed. That's what's happening with a DSC call. And then the position sharing, I've never used that. I've only done a couple of DSC individual calls to call boats that of friends that I've got loaded. And the great thing is it plays a weird little noise on the phone or on their radio. They have to hit an accept button, and then both of you are linked up and you're talking on 6, 8, or 9 digitally and privately. I mean, it's not encrypted. CIA could hear you, but you know, it's a private conversation. Nobody else can hear you. And then when you're done, you go back to 16. For the position report, you can send your position to someone else, like, hey, here's where I am, meet me. Or for the fishermen in the group, man, I'm on a really hot little live bottom right now and I'm catching fish like crazy. Here's my position. You can digitally send it just to their MMSI number and they'll get it. And if their radio is interfaced through NMEA cabling to the rest of their navigation network, that pops up on their multifunction display screen. You can go find your buddy. Or the position request is really cool. If your kids are out in the dinghy and they've got this DSC capable radio, when you ping them, the radio or the boat sends the position back. And so you can keep track of the handheld radio or a fixed thing. You can find out where your friends are by pinging them with a position request. Their radio digitally responds and gives you their position, or you see your radio walking up, you know, Main Street in Annapolis, and you know the dinghy is docked and someone's shopping or whatever. Yes, sir.
Yeah, my VHF only has and receive only from the NVIDIA, from my GPS, so this won't work for me.
This may not, if you've got an, oh, the question was, you've got only receive only NMEA 0813 cable giving the GPS into your phone or into your radio. But if you do you have some sort of smallish window, then you will get those in the screen. It won't show up on your chart plotter if you don't have two-way NMEA 2000, probably a little bit newer network. But you will see, like on those screenshots, you know, here's the position report. You're about to send one. Yes, send it. But in this case, this we're querying Karen's boat. We did a position report. Position replies, or that's the replies back. And once it's in the radio, that position would show up on the screen. All right, and then, you know, back to the safety piece, we're back to the same little chart of required, et cetera. Even though in the United States, the requirement for US waters only, inland only, has been reduced such that a digital or electronic flare, like is on the right side there, an EVDSD or LED flare, is a complete and total replacement for all flares on your boat. You do not have to keep 3 on board anymore. And you know, the Coast Guard requirements for smaller boats has never required aerial flares versus handheld. You've only had to have 3. As you've already seen, I'm not a big fan of the minimums. We talked about the curvature of the earth and how far line of sight is. Well, if you're, a handheld flare on deck, here's the advantages of any kind of, 12 gauge or 25 millimeter rocket, or even the parachutes that are really great if you're waiting on a search and rescue from an aircraft and you can hear the plane and boom, you can be seen for 47 miles on a clear day. However, I'm a big fan of having both. In Canada, you're required to have both, it's by vessel size, and it's a mix of some pyro or some aerials, verticals, and some handhelds. I have both on board. I still have aerial 12 gauge flares. I've got a few handhelds, just burning flares that they haven't expired yet. When they expire, I'm not going to replace my handhelds because I'm very happy with that, mainly because the handheld visibility in this range is just as bright. It's ridiculously bright, in fact. But the handhelds burn between 1 and 3 minutes, depending on how big fat ones that you've got, or 3. Kind of the normal Orion ones are one-ish minute. But these run for 3 hours nonstop and just incredibly bright. And it's flashing a mix of red and cyan, which is blue-green, and simultaneously it's transmitting infrared in case you're being searched for by an aircraft at night that's using infrared night vision goggles. Pretty impressive. So I'm very happy with those, the digitals. And then for those going further offshore, now we're moving into that must-have, should-have, like-to-have. Somebody asked a question earlier about, the EPIRB and your MMSI number. You've got the MMSI number loaded into the EPIRB because the EPIRB, and common mistake between a personal locator beacon and an EPIRB. A PLB is for the person and protects the person. The EPIRB protects and is attached to the boat. So, and the real key, if you're considering getting one of these, and reminder, it's the further you go offshore. I've got the caveats there. It's like, you probably don't need a PLB in the Chesapeake Bay where, except for the absolute widest parts, you could almost swim to the side. But you start to consider truly doing some offshore coastal cruising, or you're going to do the Great Lakes, then I'm a big fan of the PLBs. They're not particularly expensive. And then EPIRBs for way offshore, offshore cruisers only. To me, that's a should have, almost a must have. And if you rarely do it, I mentioned earlier that there are rental services available for short trips. But there are really kind of 3 tiers of personal locator beacon. There's the ones that are truly just designed to be man overboard only, and think about how effective they are. They're shorter range in their transmission, but it assumes a much faster reaction time because it's man overboard focused. It's really designed to let your own boat come back and find you at night you're in the water, or other boats are notified as well. Some of the brands have both AIS transmission and digital selective calling. So vessels that have AIS are going to see the man overboard on the screen. Vessels that have digital selective calling, pretty much everybody, they're going to see that appear as an emergency. The next tier down, and that's what this guy's wearing in the water, he's got a satellite PLB, which is transmitting on the 2 frequencies that are detected by overhead satellites. Great tool, long range, anywhere in the world coverage, but similarly, the response is going to be a whole lot slower. So to me, getting all in one is this little guy. There's only one right now, and I don't represent ACR. I just happen to show all their products here, these bright green ones. But ACR right now is the only one that makes a little tiny PLB. It has AIS, and therefore you're getting satellite communications and transmitting to any vessel that's got AIS. So you've got short range response, any vessel near you, and you're alerting authorities that you're in the water. All of these are manually started. They don't trigger automatically when you hit the water like an inflatable life jacket might. You've got to actively, and in the case of those satellite ones, you've got to pull the antenna out, deploy it, and then activate. And then finally, and this is way over in the like to have, but they're so inexpensive. The article goes very deep into kind of scenario based. It's like, okay, when would I need this? What is it? If it's an emergency, no kidding, then it's probably a PLB. But if it's, you're broken down, but you don't need rescue, then the satellite communicator is great. I just happened to show the Garmin InReach right there, but pretty remarkable global satellite coverage. You can transmit little cookie crumb trails to your friends so that they can kind of monitor your voyage. You can text and send and receive messages via the app or some of them on the screen. So pretty nice little options there on that far right side of the chart. All right. All right, so now, sorry, question, yes, ma'am.
Is that signal going to a geostationary satellite? Do you know?
Good question. Are these geostationary? I don't know if they are. If they are geostationary, then there's enough of them to cover. And all of the new ones are picked up by, there's, international network. Just like GPS, there's GPS and GLONASS, the Russian version, and Baidu, the Chinese version of GPS. There's also an internationally launched series of satellites, and all of these transmit the same frequency is recognized internationally, 121.5 megahertz for, talking to airplanes that are tracking your beacon, and then 406 megahertz is the satellite. So all those global satellites kind of cover and overlap, and despite, global tensions that ebb and flow in the search and rescue world, everybody cooperates and shares their.
ChatGPT says no, the Garmin InReach doesn't go to geostationary. It goes to
They may be.
the network of the mesh.
So if it's Iridium, then those are, multiple satellites that are on, subpolar orbits. So they're, in angled orbits. So there's always, just like GPS, multiple satellites in view at any one time, and they're collectively covering. Because if the risk, if it was geostationary, you wouldn't have global coverage, because geostationary generally are in a belt around the middle of the Earth, and geostationary doesn't cover the pole.
Not that I'm planning to do any sailing in the Arctic.
Right, yeah, for Arctic coverage, absolutely. Yeah, you want satellites that are truly global coverage. No, great question.
Thank you.
Sorry, yes, please.
Just because several years of sailing out here, our biggest emergency was averted by the horn, which you have listed.
The horn.
But having a horn right there accessible, we learned the balance.
Great. No, interesting. No, yeah, the comment was, one of your only real world emergencies here in the Bay was averted by the horn. And in the article I emphasized, and it's, it's there on the chart, a loud horn. I'm a fan of the compressed air horns as a backup, but the range effective, and again, back to the U.S. Coast Guard minimums sound signaling device, the letter of the law is met by a mouth-blown whistle. But that's nonsense. I mean, in any kind of wind or weather, closed pilot house doors, et cetera, you are not reaching beyond, 100 yards or so with a whistle. With the air can, it might get you to half a mile, quarter mile. I'm fortunate my boat came with 2 monster Collenberg compressed air horns, and it's like, cruise ship, womp. It's awesome. I mean, it's so great. Now, crew resource management lesson learned. We warn our spouse before, especially if Ashley is on the bow, line handling, et cetera, we warn your crew, hey, I'm about to use the ship's whistle. Or especially if I'm, on the flying bridge, the whistle's down below me on the side of the pilot house bulkhead there. And if anybody's forward, it is just, right, burning a hole in their head. So, but I agree. Yeah, I'm a big fan of seriously loud horn, and, it's required, yes. The air horn can, compressed air can is not a bad idea. They're notorious for rusting, so be careful where you store them. But a really nice feature of the air horn can is if your seawater intake for your engine gets clogged with grasses and stuff like that, the ease with which you can open the top of your strainer, and either with some kind of little seal, you can take the hose off for sailboats that have got 1.5 inches. You put it right in the air horn, and boom, and all the grass goes out, and now you've got flow again. Even for bigger ones, you make a little gasket out of a wet paper towel or something like that. Boom, It's awesome. I've done it one time and it's just unbelievable. I mean, it avoids, especially in a seaway or something like that, you're offshore and it's a rough day, or you've just gotten underway from somewhere and there's a lot of traffic and holy cow, the engine just shut down from low flow. You do not want to have to get in the water to get all those grasses out. The low compressed air horn is a great item in your toolbox. All right, great question. So now we're going to dig into, now rules of the road by itself, we've got 20 minutes left, could be a day-long course. And so I'm going to try and focus on the no kidding what you need to know, and we'll dive into those. So for first, collision avoidance, what's the question is, what's the most important safety item on board? Anyone? Eyeballs was one. Anyone else? There's a collision avoidance specifically. I'm a big fan. Another eyeball gesture. Radio, good, okay. Tate's opinion, the most important safety device, this is for collision avoidance, is the throttle. And I say that because with a fingertip or hand, you can change the inertia of several tons and buy yourself time and eliminate risk pretty significantly. So probably the majority of the close calls that you've probably experienced in the past on your own boat were directly related to throttle position, certainly true for me, whether it's in the Navy or on my own boat, whether it was docking, near miss with a vessel, hitting the water, hitting a wake too hard, et cetera. And I think it takes practice. The key takeaway, an honest assessment of your skills and speed. The rules are very clear about all the factors that go into considering safe speed, but generally, and I suffer from this, there's no question, because of my deep experience at sea, I sometimes probably should have slowed down and I didn't because of my experience. I'm a little overconfident. But to me, if you start thinking of your throttle lever as a critical safety device designed to slow down tons of mass and inertia, I think you'll appreciate it with greater respect of its importance, really, and speed as a factor. AIS, the automatic identification system. You see just a few little screenshots there. I'm sure several of you have it. I've got it on my boat. The emphasis on the previous chart of must have, should have, et cetera, is if you're going to get it, get an AIS transceiver that's transmitting your position to everybody who's got AIS, and it receives all the others. The difference in price between receive-only units and transceivers now is almost non-existent. The poor man's AIS, and I used it a lot before I bought AIS for our boat. Ashley bought it for me for Christmas a few years ago, is the marine traffic app. Now, the problem there is that if you are cruising in a zone that doesn't have participating shore antennas that are capturing AIS and then reposting them online on the marine traffic app, then you're going to miss some vessels. But around here, we have several. I'm on the Magathie River. In the upper Magathie, there aren't any participants who've got an AIS receiver ashore. But when I get down to the mouth of the Magathie and anywhere near Annapolis, there's several people who are part of that network. And so you've got good coverage. But the app is great as opposed to marine traffic on the web version, because the app has your vessel and it's a couple minutes time late. It's not nearly as fast as real AIS, but you can see other vessels and you can call them on the radio, which is very handy. But the reminder, it is not a panacea for collision avoidance because it only shows you vessels that have AIS and are successfully transmitting. So you're missing a whole bunch, which is why I've got radar under the should have or under the must have category, and AIS is under the should have. I'm always want to be budget conscious for all of our boating, and if I was going to drop the money, even though radars are a lot more expensive, I'd get a radar before I got AIS to make sure I could see every object, including non-vessels, et cetera. And if you've got radar, then use it all the time. I use it in the daytime in crystal clear weather. It's a great cross-training tool. Ultimately, you've got to get used to what blips look like. Yes, ma'am.
Can you clarify about what you mean all the time? I'm going to sailboat. If I've got that turned on, I will have no battery. When you say all the time, what's a good protocol for using radar?
Good question. Yeah, all the time may not apply to sailboats that it would suck down a ton of power. I'm currently now on the dark side, and I'm a power boater, so it's all the time for a power audience That's a great question. I think then in that case, maybe in the interest of practice, this is the objective here. It's not that I need radar. It's that the day you get familiar with interpreting, just a screenshot, it's like, is that a vessel? Is that a buoy? What is that little blip? And then if you've got an AIS overlay, 2 or 3 of these are AIS traffics, that's a shore, or is it pilings or whatever, is training your understanding of the tuning of the radar to be able to, that's the all the time piece, is to be able to use it all the time so that you are familiar. In the case of power hungry radars on sailboats, if you're not motoring, then use it often enough to be intimately familiar with what a teeny tiny little fiberglass boat that gives a poor reflection, and more so at what range. Like you see a small boat coming, you're like, oh, why isn't that on radar? Why isn't that on radar? And then boom, it shows up at maybe the 2-mile mark. It's like, oh, I'm not going to see little vessels until then. I'm going to slow down. I'll get you. Yes,
Do you know what the app looks like for marine traffic? Is it the one with the ship with the little wave under it, or is it a pentagon, or
It's a
just
pentagon.
I think
the
it's,
pentagon?
let me see, I just want to it's the Pentagon. Yeah, Pentagon Shaped Marine Traffic. Yeah. And then you can check them out, marine traffic, online at home as well. Question in the back, brother?
Yeah, regarding radar, I was under the impression that if you had radar on your boat, you were required to have it on all the time.
No.
Because if something happened and they saw that you had it and weren't using it, that you were at fault or something.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of, the question is, if you have radar on board, are you required to use it on time? And the implication with your question is really, are you enhancing your liability? There's a lot of lore out there. One of them, absolute common myth, as somebody with a high tonnage captain's license, is, oh, you shouldn't get your license because in a collision or event, you'll be held more liable. Absolutely, that myth is totally not true. Multiple years of case law show that having a license doesn't make you more liable. Now, the question is if all collision investigations and the rules of the road require you to use all means available to determine risk of collision and to avoid collision. If you had a collision and it was clearly the other person's fault and you were the stand-on vessel, but you had radar, and in every Admiralty case I've ever read, it is never 100% zero, the fault. It's 90-10 or 80-20, and the vessel who is completely the stand-on vessel sometimes contributes, and if you were the stand-on vessel totally innocently complying fully with the rules of the road, but you didn't have your radar on and didn't determine risk of collision in time, then your percentage of liability might grow slightly. But it absolutely is not a reason not to buy a radar or not to keep it on in practice. Similarly, to me, safe speed is just as effective, but yeah, I would not avoid using radar or avoid buying one because of that unlikely risk. I'd rather avoid 100 collisions than be held slightly more liable on the one that actually happened. Is there another question? No, okay, great. And then see and be seen, of course, the no-brainer about, and the trust auto piece. There are lots of features and that you can tune on your radar. Most folks don't know how to do it, so just leave them alone. The automatic filters are very effective at optimizing the condition, and the newer the radar, they're even better. Nav lights, of course, you're required to keep them on all, but then not just in the dark, but in restricted visibility. If there's any kind of haze, mist, whatever, no fault for turning on your lights at any time enhances other vessels' ability, not just to see you, but to determine your aspect. Binoculars go deep into that in the article and how to pick them, et cetera. Radar reflectors, big fan. Fiberglass does not reflect radar energy very effectively. So, all right, now we're going to dive into rules of the road with the time we have left. Sorry, we're a little behind. And no, none of you are dummies, but I'm going to focus here. But to me, if you leave anything with crossing traffic, left is never right. Turning left, meaning if you're going to, when in doubt, come right in a crossing situation. Stay in your lane. The rules require you to stay to the right side of any channel or fairway. Avoid big channels. There's no need for any of us who've got vessels with drafts from between 2 and 5 feet to stay in a commercial monster shipping channel. And then always keep an eye out for vessels to starboard, because that crossing situation is the real challenge. Steering rules apply always. Look out, safe speed, etc. We'll get to CBDR in a second, but the rules also require, if you're in doubt or you see the risk of collision developing, turn early. The nice thing too is, sometimes turning 10 degrees, 10 minutes early is all you need. If you wait another 5 or 6, now you've got to make a 90-degree turn to avoid. But then the rules also require and admonish, don't do lots of tiny little turns. Make it obvious. One big turn, or if you're going to do a speed change, that's hard to detect by another vessel on radar or visually. It's got to be a big one, so they immediately see an aspect change, like, okay, he's the giveaway vessel and he just maneuvered, I'm good. If you're the stand-on vessel, you've got an absolute responsibility to maintain course and speed. Unless you get all the way to the end and you're almost at collision, then the rules say you've got an obligation to maneuver, even if you're the stand-on vessel. The phrase right-of-way does not exist anywhere in the book except for inland rivers, on the western rivers only, and it gives the right-of-way to the vessel that's going down current. None of that applies here. Instead, they got rid of those terms, I think in the early 80s, they were in the book. Burdened vessel and terms like that, all have gotten rid of. Now it's all about responsibility. You have a responsibility to give way, or you have a responsibility to maintain course and speed, for stand on and give way. If you need the channel, few of us do, but if you need it, my vessel draws almost 5 feet, so sometimes in smaller areas, I need the channel, but the rule requires you to stay to the right. If you don't need it, if you're small, again, few of us are bigger than 20 meters, I'm not. You do not have the right. The rules tell you you shall not impede if you're less than 20 meters, and no sailing vessels, that means vessels actually sailing, are to sail in a channel if you don't meet those size requirements. And then that star is the yield piece for right of way. And then, you shall not impede a vessel is basically all of us need to generally stay out of the way of big ships that are cruising vessels. Next rules.
Question.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Yep.
So we frequently cross the shipping channel. We're sailing when we do that.
Yep.
I mean, is that?
Yeah, you're crossing. You're not using the channel. Exactly. Right. I mentioned CBDR earlier. That's what it looks like. A constant bearing. If you had a hand bearing compass, or you're looking at them through the binoculars that have a compass in there, that ship is at a constant bearing, but it's getting bigger, decreasing range. That is the risk of collision. Determine it by all means. And then overtaking, anybody, just like driving your car, if you're coming up behind somebody in traffic, you're approaching them from behind, you have to keep clear, and it doesn't matter what type of vessel you are. I deliberately built this diagram showing a sailboat, which in other situations, in fact, has some privilege over powerboats. But when any vessel is overtaking another, then it has no rights or privileges. And most of those other rules start with the phrase, notwithstanding rules 9, 10, and 13, which is narrow channels, traffic separation scheme, and overtaking. And what any of those other rules that start with notwithstanding 9, 12, 9, 10, and 13 means, 9, 10, and 13 trump that entire section. So don't start reading about the rights of fishing vessels or whatever. If you're overtaking somebody, you have to avoid the person you're overtaking. If you're head on, the rules say, just like a car in the United States, we drive on the right side. If it's coming at you directly head on meeting situation, both vessels are required to come right. And the rules also specify when in doubt, assume it's a head on and come right. That's why on that or rules of the road for dummies, left is never right. When in doubt, don't come left and cross their bow. Both come right because you're expecting them to and they're expecting you to. For crossing, turning left isn't right, or left is never right. Again, this is nothing like driving your car. And then the rules start with, unless otherwise agreed to, that means by radio. If you've already talked about, a port to port or starboard to starboard passage, then continue to do what you've agreed to. But the nice memory aid, which is great on the way that our navigation lights on every vessel are designed, the side lights, little diagram as a reminder at the top right there, is if you see red in a crossing situation, red means stop, just like in the car. You are the giveaway vessel if you see red. If you see green, you're on the other boat, then you are the stand-on vessel. Green means go. If you see green in the crossing situation, keep cruising, don't change course or speed. If you see red, come right generally, but the key is you have to maneuver to avoid. These are the collision avoidance myths. It was pointed out to me that this picture that I just grabbed off of the internet actually happened very close by here, and I was cautioned. It's like, dude, you can't show that picture here. But this actually happened. So there's the, which rule was violated here? Power vessel clearly did not keep clear of the sailing vessel. And then again, I use the term right of way throughout this because it's part of the myth. And sailboats have the right of way. Well, it's like, okay, the rules describe responsibilities. If you've got your engine in gear, even though you've got sails up, you're now a power-driven vessel and you have no privileges. If you're less than 66 feet, you cannot impede vessels in channel. And then in the previous example, if you're overtaking, you got to keep clear no matter what. Now this one, Tate Westbrook pet peeve about fishing. It's like the rules are very clear. You must have nets, lines, or trawls that restrict your maneuverability. Bless their little hearts, all of the good old boys out here who got the book or heard from their buddy, dude, you don't need to buy that book. If you're fishing, you got the right of way. Trigger phrase, right of way doesn't exist, but more so, you have to be a vessel whose nets, lines, or trawls restrict maneuverability. And no matter how much you've spent on that cool daisy chain and those bright yellow planers for fishing on rockfish, none of those restrict the ability for you to turn the wheel on your, Robalo 23 and comply with the rules of the road. And then same with recreational power boats or head boats with a bunch of lines in the bottom. None of those folks qualify. You've got to be hauling huge big nets and gear or a long liner at sea, that kind of stuff. You can always identify a boat, maybe not. Sometimes it's hard to see with backscatter, or some boats don't comply fully. We talked about right of way, log gross tonnage, all those fake things. And then paddlecraft absolutely do not have special privileges. If you are a stand-up paddleboarder like me or a kayaker, et cetera, you are still subject to the rules. You can't impede vessels in the channel, that sort of thing. Is there a question? Sorry. All right, and then the pecking order we talked about. This is the rule that starts with except where narrow channels and overtaking. And then an easy memory aid is this: only new reels catch fish, so purchase some weekly. That's the first letter of each of these. And whoever's at the top has preference and privilege over the others. All the ones below any vessel above it have to keep clear of the vessels at the top. We're down here usually. There. Wing and ground effect, I've never seen one in real life, but that's a picture of one of those vessels. And then something that you will often probably see in your journeys up and down the East Coast and especially Mississippi Gulf Coast, that sort of thing, these are the lights and day shapes for dredges, and they will always indicate which side is the safe side to pass. This memory aid, diamonds are a girl's best friend, referencing the old song and movie. And then at night, it's much more intuitive that the green side is the safe side. And then of these dredge pipes that discharge the dredge spoil from dredges working, this is at an angle and sticking down in the water, just grinding up the bottom, and then they're pumping the dredge spoil away. They always create a gap if there's some essential place to pass through. And this is how it looks at night. Good idea. If you're in doubt, call them on channel 13 and they'll tell you where the safe spot is. But the daytime, nighttime piece is key. And then this is what true commercial, these are fishing vessels that might be hampered in their ability to maneuver some way. buy their gear. They will display these day shapes, though it's sometimes really hard to see. I mean, this little, the two cones, apex pointing together are, if you were at a different angle, it'd be obscured by the gear. And then at night even, I've enhanced this one by dropping green and white on top. But at night, you can barely, with this huge, big, bright light for a long liner, you can barely see the red over white, and you can barely even tell the color. So you can't always trust what they're doing. And you may have noticed that, towing vessels are not listed in that previous section. Towing vessels have no privileges. They're just power-driven vessels. However, their lights and their day shapes do warn you that sometimes there's a challenge. Another plus of radar, you can see a string of multiple barges, etc. But a lot of times there's been mishaps where a tug and tow on a long wire, that vessels, especially at night, sometimes in the daytime, have attempted to cross between the two, and you will know by the white over white that it's towing at night. And then from the rear, yellow over white, you've got that extra stern light above the regular stern light, yellow over white. My hawser is tight, and then the forward masthead lights, 2 whites in a row, is a tug and tow. This is, if you're in the U.S. inland waters only, they add a yellow blinking light. Looks like, it originated from those construction blinking lights, and that's why they're on there. They are really good about maintaining those and keeping the blinker, and that warns you well in advance, but it's only a U.S. inland waters only item, so you won't see that internationally. Bridge systems, etc., they're very good about, as soon as the bridge is open, the lights change from red to green. And I'm going to hit anchoring. I'm now over time, so I'm going to blow through this. But here's the basics all in one. We often see, or I hear people talk about either they don't anchor a lot because they haven't been successful, or I anchored and I kept dragging, etc. The anchor success is all about the scope that you put out. And the anchor really doesn't hold you on the bottom. It's either the weight of the chain and the line holding you against currents and wind, and the anchor's there to hold that catenary, that sag, and that weight of line down to keep the boat still. So when in doubt, put out more scope. And you see these examples of quick lunch stop, 5 to 1, 8 to 1 in a strong wind or current. Basically, when in doubt, put out more. Take a few minutes and keep your electronics on. There's plenty of great anchoring apps, and some multifunction displays have got an anchor drag function where you can set the alarm, just monitor, and then use trees or other nearby fixed objects to make sure you're not dragging before you shut the engine down and tell everybody they can jump in and swim or whatever. And that concludes our time slot. Any questions on any of those? Thank you. And any final wrap-ups or whatever, if you want to just come up and ask me a question. I've got a little break. I'm going to grab some lunch before our next session this afternoon for navigation, for those of you who are staying there.
Yes.